over 300 people die every year due to pollution, I should say, from coal-fired power plants. That's according to Eskom's latest research. The power utility saying it plans to do away with coal-fired power generation by 2030. A Groundwork campaign coordinator is Rico, Euripidou, and he joins us now for a chat on this. Rico, good morning to you, and I apologized for the butchering of your surname. Let's perhaps begin with this question around whether or not the people who die of pollution, and in particular coal-fired power plants from Eskom, do these people have any legal recourse, at least those that are connected to them, their family members who get left behind?
Good morning to you and your listeners, Toli. So that's a really good question. People have been living in these heavily air-polluted areas now ever since we built coal-fired power stations there, and they've had very little recourse to justice. So that's a good question. So these people and the disproportionate health impacts that they bear from air pollution, should they have recourse to justice? Do they ever receive compensation? Are they ever acknowledged? Are they ever visible? Are these deaths visible? And the short answer to that is no. And the reason for that is because government chooses to ignore them deliberately. In our air quality governance, we have, up until this date, very limited capacity to measure health impacts specifically. The National Department of Health, up until a couple of years ago, was largely absent from oversight and governance of air pollution. So the National Department of Health doesn't acknowledge these deaths. But we know that air pollution is a serious killer in the world. And in South Africa, we have a public health emergency because of air pollution from Eskom's coal-fired power stations. And we know this now because we, Groundwork, along with our partners, the Center for Research on Clean Air and Environment, we've been measuring and using globally accepted, these are World Health Organization and World Bank accepted models to determine what the true impact of health is. Yeah. And although Eskom acknowledges 300 deaths every year, the reason we don't believe that is because our modeling follows a more globally accepted standard, and we estimate that's up to 2,000 deaths a year. So at least now Eskom is acknowledging that its coal-fired power stations and the air pollution is killing people. And yes, we should be thinking very carefully about what compensation or what a just recourse for these communities affected by pollution might look like. Yeah,
and while you point out the figures, Rico, and yours differ radically to those of Eskom. So Eskom saying, or admitting, and it's quite an admission, by the way, that 300 people die every year due to pollution. But your figures are suggesting that upwards of 2,000 people are killed by pollution every year, and this is owing to Eskom's power plants. Let's then discuss why, if they are aware that this is happening, the immediate communities that are affected, are there any steps that have been taken over the years to try and either move them or try and give them coping mechanisms, if any?
So what you say is an interesting kind of basket of ideas and options. But there is a much simpler solution to all of this. In South Africa, we have our president has agreed on a just transition through a presidential commission for climate change. And part of that just transition compact is that the communities that are affected by the coal economy and by air pollution from the coal economy should have recourse to what is called restorative justice. Restorative justice is looking at the the impacts that they've suffered, and to find a way of fairly compensating people for that. We don't have to move people because our coal-fired power stations are old and they are meant to be coming to the end of their life anyway. By 2030, at least a third of our coal-fired power stations are so old that we should retire them. In fact, we must retire them, because if we don't retire them, we'll continue to keep poisoning people indefinitely, and we will continue to make our market uncompetitive, because we will manufacture goods and services from this carbon-intensive economy that we have. And the rest of the world, who have acknowledged that we have to move away and transition from this carbon-intensive economy, will begin to deliberately exclude us from the global market. So there's a very strong economic argument and also a health and justice argument about why we shouldn't carry on with our coal-fired power stations that have reached the end of their life anyway.
Yeah.
But because of our load-shedding crisis, our government is instead choosing to extend the life, which is counterintuitive for so many different reasons. It's counterintuitive for economy because our economy is uncompetitive. It's counterintuitive because it means we delay a rollout of renewable energy, which is already proven to be much cheaper, more cost-effective, and implementable, and it will reshape our economy, giving people more economic opportunities. One last thing before I come back to you.
Yeah.
Air pollution travels hundreds of kilometers. There is no science that refutes that air pollution isn't a transboundary pollutant. It doesn't stay in one place. The way Eskom modeled their health impacts is they said air pollution from their power station only travels 50 kilometers. They used a 50 kilometer by 50 kilometer domain.
Yeah.
They said our air pollution stays in the Highveld, which is absolute nonsense. Their air pollution travels to Gauteng, Pretoria, Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, all these heavily populated areas. And I can promise you, if you know 4 people that have died from a heart attack, at least one of them will have been because of air pollution. If you know 4 people that have died because of cancer, at least 2 of them might have died because of air pollution. The air pollution science is irrefutable. It is so good at the moment that we can model the health impacts of air pollution as long as we know the concentration of the air pollution and how many people live in a domain. So we modeled a 300 by 300 kilometer domain. We said air pollution travels because that's what the science said, and that's what the science dictates we should put into our model. And that's how we come up with a higher figure. It's simple manipulation of the statistics. Eskom have decided that their pollution stays in the Highveld, which is absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
The beautiful sunsets you see in Johannesburg and Pretoria, you know, when the sky is red at night,
Yeah.
that's because of air pollution. It's light refracting through the dust particles. So think about that the next time you see a beautiful sunset in Johannesburg. That's air pollution, and that's killing me and potentially my family.
Wow. And let's talk about the possibility, therefore, of people arguing convincingly, let's just say in a court of law, that a heart attack that killed a loved one could have been induced by air pollution stemming from one of Eskom's many power plants. By the way, you've just mentioned it yourself, that these plants, government still relies heavily on them, including the new build, by the way. So how does one win such a case in a court of law? And perhaps as a rider to that, do you think that the longer Eskom continues to rely on these coal-fired power stations, the more it is likely to open itself up to class action lawsuits?
So let's look at the precedents in South Africa. What's already happened in the gold mining industry? We've seen successful class actions on silicosis and the association between gold mining, silicosis and the health and deaths of workers. Already, billions have been paid out by the major gold companies. There is a class action now underway associated with the coal mining industry and workers and health outcomes and deaths. And that is likely to be successful also. The same will happen with air pollution because the science is so clear. The reason why those class actions were successful with silicosis is because the silicosis itself has such a specific health outcome on those workers, on those miners. And the air pollution science is irrefutable, as I've said previously. So it is just a matter of time before a clever lawyer or a clever group of lawyers meets up with communities affected by air pollution in the Highveld and as you rightly say, begins to think about and puts together the architecture for a class action. As far as our new build is concerned in South Africa, our power stations that we've just built recently, Kusile and Medupi, were meant to come online at least 10 years ago at cost. They are at least 10 years late, and they are hundreds of billions of rands over cost already. I'm going to give you an analogy. In the last year alone, in the last calendar year, from last July until now, South Africans, homeowners, at their own cost, have installed rooftop solar in excess of the energy that Kusile and Medupi produce.
Wow.
Now, that is telling. They have built a coal-fired power station on their rooftops at no cost to the government in 1 year time, at no cost to the taxpayer, no corruption, and are providing themselves with safe and reliable energy that doesn't affect their health. We should not be thinking about coal. There should not be any allocation for coal in our integrated resource plan. We should not have any coal at all in our future. We should be thinking 100% renewables, taking into account that these two brand new power stations are both largely full of flaws and faults, producing less electricity and less energy than they should have been. Already at Kusile Power Station, the pollution control that was meant to have been built in, it's called FDG, to capture the sulfur out of the stacks. Already that has failed. It hasn't even come online. Already they have exemptions to pollute more than what our South African laws say they are allowed to pollute. Coal and coal-fired power stations are a total failure. This is a 100-year-old technology being used now in the future. There is absolutely no argument and no place for coal in our energy future. And we should be demanding that the existing plants that have reached their end of life need to be closed down on time, because any delay will mean an extra 2,000-3,000 deaths every single year that they delay those closures. And every year that we delay the closures, it means we are delaying the rollout of renewable energy. It is absolute madness. From a public health perspective, it is absolute madness. There is no argument for keeping these coal-fired power stations going.
Rico, Euripidou, thank you very much for your time and indeed just getting us a picture of what we are up against here. He is a Groundwork campaign coordinator. It's worrying statistics that he has quoted.